Well, I'll bet the pubs in Westminster are absolutely packed tonight. And indeed, the GBNews pub is open, and I'm joined by Nigel Nelson. Nigel, welcome to
Nice to see you.
Pints. Now, politics is a rough, dirty old game. But political journalism is not exactly straightforward either, is
No.
it? And you have been editing for, it's getting on 40 years, isn't it?
Well, I started in 1986 when Margaret Thatcher was still Prime Minister.
Yep.
So working them through, I sort of had Thatcher, Major, Blair, Brown, Cameron, May, and we're now on number 7.
Yeah. And with the Mirror all the way through?
Yeah, I started with the Sunday People.
Yep.
So I was political editor of that one. And then about 5 years ago, we decided to amalgamate the staffs of the paper. So I took over the Sunday Mirror as well. So I'm political editor of both.
Yes.
So they decided to actually work me twice as hard.
Well, you seem to be thriving on it because you seem to enjoy it. And obviously, you come at your politics much more from a Labour Party perspective, and you always have done. How good a PM was Blair?
I think he would have been the best PM of the last 50 years had it not been for Iraq. So I think that he was by far the most consummate politician we produced for a long time, probably since sort of someone like Clem Attlee for the things that he achieved. And everything got lost by, I mean, it happens with most prime ministers, they make some catastrophic mistake and that's the end of it. In Blair's case, it actually took away his legacy. There was no question that Iraq was a huge error. I understand why he did it.
Do you?
Yeah, I do, because I think that I understand the way he saw it anyway, that his feeling at the time was the most important thing for Britain was the alliance with America. And so, in a sense, what he was doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. So he was trying to stick close to Bush. He made a promise to Bush, which he should never have made.
No.
And then he was scuttling around afterwards trying to get international support that Bush never cared about. And so we now know there were no WMD. He really didn't have the evidence at the time to justify that war. And I think that has ruined his legacy. So Blair, having been incredibly popular, now is astonishingly toxic.
Yeah. No, he really is. Because when you started, for younger viewers, this is really hard to take in. But when you started, television was, I think, 3 channels.
Yeah.
Channel 4 hadn't been invented, I think, by then. There was no internet.
No.
And
much easier.
But newspapers, I mean, it's difficult for younger people to understand just how powerful and how big the newspaper industry was.
Yeah, I don't think that we were so much powerful as influential. I always think that we didn't actually have power as such. It was a simpler way of dealing with politics, and I think simpler for politicians as well as for journalists. So, I mean, the way it worked in those days is you had TV and radio, you had newspapers, and you then had a kind of a political timeline that went through that. So obviously the daily news would appear in the daily papers. I worked for Sunday papers. The way the system used to work in those days was that they would talk to us about ideas they had. So in a sense, it would be a cabinet minister would call you in and say, I've got this great idea. You can't have any of this on the record, but you can have the story. What would then happen is they produce a policy, and that is the modern day consultation.
Yeah.
In those days, the policy would go out into the paper. Their fingerprints weren't on it. As a result, they could find out how it would play with the public, how it would play with experts. People would come back to them and say, that might work if you tweak this. Other people would come back and say, it'll never work, and they would scrap it. And so they had no fingerprints on it themselves, which meant it was much easier.
And they trusted you that much to do
Yes. I mean, the whole thing is that the lobby system in those days was secretive in the sense these meetings never officially happened. You could argue that is not transparency. Well, it certainly wasn't. I would argue that it actually made for really good governance because a policy didn't have to be announced by a politician and then they had to stick with it. What they could do is they could try something out and see if it worked.
So was the relationship between journalists and politicians closer then?
Yeah, I think it was. I think that as you say, both sides have to trust each other in a situation like that. And so my view about whenever I go to work, this applies now to an extent, the most important tool I carry with me to work is trust. Politicians are fairly grown up for the most part. I can slag them off. Well, they are rather. I can slag them off.
I mean, you've written.
Look, I've done it to you.
I mean, you've written about me.
Exactly.
You've written about me many
years.
times.
Yeah.
And what have I said about you on Sunday mornings? I can't remember.
Well, you probably something unpleasant. But either way, the point is that
But isn't it a question of whether it's fair criticism or unfair criticism?
Yes, I think it is that. And so sometimes I've made mistakes and fallen out with politicians as a result of it. But what it means is if I write a piece on Sunday, I've got to go back to the House of Commons and look that person in the eye the following week. And so the important thing is that they respect where I'm coming from. They don't have to agree with it. They do object, and rightly so, if I've made a mistake, if it's been criticism that they do feel is unfair, or if any way they thought it might be underhand. So it is the trust thing which I think is the most important thing for a political journalist.
Because, I mean, let's face it, elements of our newspaper industry did go too far, way, way too far. I don't know what you think, but I kind of thought Leveson actually worked quite well, and I kind of think that the relationship now between the media and not just politicians but public figures is a much more reasonable relationship. You know, the idea that you could use a camera with a long lens and take a photograph of somebody in their private property and publish it. I mean, that's what was happening, wasn't it? It was outrageous.
Yeah, there were a lot of things going on there. I think that Leveson was a great wake-up call for us. Frankly, I was absolutely shocked about the whole thing. I had been...
What, the phone hacking?
Yeah, completely. That I had no idea.
Do you mean that the Mirror Group never did this?
No, the Mirror Group did do it. That is the point. That was the thing that actually shocked me hugely. And we're paying out a lot of compensation on the basis of that. I knew nothing about it when it was going on, and the majority of staff didn't know anything about it. Had I been asked to do it, I would have refused. I don't think I knew even in those days it was against the law. I'd have refused on ethical grounds and said, this is just not on. But it became a kind of, I just can't believe this sort of thing was going on. I had a similar feeling about the MP's expenses scandal. I was completely shocked how people who were friends of mine, as politicians, the kind of things they've been claiming for. I just thought, how could you do this? And so Leveson, in a sense, was the same kind of shock for my industry as it was, if you like, for politics
I think
when I saw that happen.
I think it did a lot of good. I think it did get that balance back to perhaps where we needed it to be. Now, when you started, I mean, it must have been just a big boys' club, really. I mean, the drink... I mean, there
were a few girls there, but not many.
There weren't many in those days.
Not many, no.
You know,
and there's still not enough. There's still not enough women in political journalism, and that needs to be addressed. And I think one of the difficulties is it is a 24/7 job.
Now it really is.
Well, now news is 24/7. But even looking back then, you're always kind of on duty. You're always thinking about it. And it's very difficult to switch off. Obviously, if you are a mother with young children, that makes it more difficult unless you've got a lot of help from your partner. Now I think that we are getting the balance better, and more women are coming into the business, and it is good. It has done political journalism a lot of good to have more women there.
And a tough old day for the Prime Minister. And one of the things that Sue Gray did, I mean, it's a pretty flimsy report, but one of the things she did say was the drink culture inside Number 10. I would think your early days of Fleet Street, I mean, people drank all day, didn't they?
Yes, they did. I mean, and now you look back on it and think, how on earth did we get away with that? How was that possible? Yeah, we did our jobs. I'm not quite sure how.
Yeah.
And the same thing when I first went into the House of Commons. I mean, the drink culture in the House of Commons was absolutely astonishing. I mean, at night time, MPs had to be propped up by a couple of others to get them through the voting lobby. And you sort of thought, this is the way democracy works. This is most peculiar. I think that probably in society as a whole, the drink culture has changed. People just don't drink the way that they used to. And so that applies both to journalism and to politics.
So are we getting overexcited about Boris's parties?
No, because I think we're still back to that issue about his judgment, the feeling that he didn't really care about things. We're now seeing the kind of chaos that reigns in Downing Street, all of which goes to the character of the Prime Minister. And I think the public have a right to know what kind of person is actually leading them. politicians like to say, oh, no, what people care about is policy. No, they don't. They care about personalities. And they want to know that the leader they have got is actually acting all the way through in their best interest. And I think what the parties show is either he didn't care, or, as Theresa May said today,
it was
he
quite
didn't
a moment,
know.
Quite a moment, wasn't it?
I think that you can't imagine these things happening under someone like Theresa May.
Yeah.
But it is this kind of chaos around him, and that, to my mind, it makes him unqualified to be Prime Minister.
The trust issue, I think, is... I mean, I had Trevor Kavanagh sitting there not long ago. You know, like you, veteran political journalist, different side of the divide, but he was very much of that very, very, very similar opinion. He may not survive, but you said personality.
Yeah.
Sir Keir Starmer, distinguished record, you know, rose up through the ranks of the legal profession. He's now leading a Labour Party and a united Labour Party, which...
It is indeed.
It's almost hard to believe. I didn't think it was possible. He's got no personality, has he?
Well, he has. I mean, that's the... And I wish
I haven't spotted it.
Well, I wish more of it would come out. You ought to get him doing one of these things.
Well, we'll ask him, of course.
But that he is very personable. He's great fun to be with. He is very bright. And the one thing that he actually needs is a bit more oomph, a bit less risk averse, getting out there, talking to people. And I think all that will come. But obviously the election now is probably only 2 years away, so really it's something to get on with.
I mean, he's a social democrat more than a socialist.
I'd have said so, that would be my impression of him, yeah, yes, a social democrat.
Funny, isn't
probably...
it? Because prior to Brexit, they'd all become social democrats.
Yeah.
Brexit gave us genuine divides. Corbyn arrived. We had real choices in politics, and we're now all going back to being social democrats again.
Yes, I think that the Corbyn era was interesting. That first of all, Corbynomics has actually been adopted by Rishi Sunak.
I can't believe it. I know.
That's exactly what... I mean, if had John McDonnell been Chancellor, that's the kind of money he would have spent.
Yeah, and of course price caps and spending and taxes. I just don't get it.
But I did think that with Jeremy Corbyn, it was an interesting experiment with the voters. The last time socialism, in the sense of that kind of socialism, had been tried was back in 1983 with Michael Foot. The voters rejected that. I think it was quite important to give it another chance and see what happened. Now, again, the voters rejected it. I don't think this country is ready for that kind of socialism. I mean, what Jeremy used to tell me was what he planned was a socialist British revolution. So that was always the kind of plan there. The voters said no. And that's the beauty of democracy.
No, they did. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because, you know, you're a regular here on GBNews, and that's great. And despite some of the rubbish written about us, there is all ranges of opinion, you know, welcome here on this station. It's great to have you coming in so regularly and doing things. But when you go home, you know, with your convictions and your belief, to Claire, Conservative councillor,
Yep.
and on the right of the Conservative Party on some issues. I mean, how does a marriage work like that?
It works because, probably because we're both political professionals. We've never fallen out over politics. And so we do talk about it all the time, and particularly during the Brexit days. I was a Remainer.
I know you were.
She was a Brexiteer.
Yep.
In some senses, that having that conversation, it is a conversation rather than an argument. You actually learn things. So, for instance, Claire has made me rethink about votes at 16 on the basis of what would I think about 16-year-olds being in adult prisons.
So it's a civilised household.
Absolutely.
How many more years have you got in journalism, Nigel?
I don't intend to pack up. I'm going on for good.
On that note, thank you for joining me on Talking Pints.
Cheers.